There are two important contexts that I want to come back to with this beautiful song, the Magnificat, this sermon, prophetic speech of Mary's. And the first one is the context of occupation. We've talked about this before. But we see it really clearly in the Christmas story, which starts with them moving throughout the country, going to Bethlehem, right, pretty soon after this, because of a census that was required by Caesar Augustus. So the gospel writers want us to remember that context. The context is occupation of a people by a ruling power. And with that comes oppression and exploitation and vulnerability and uncertainty that they were experiencing. Now, this is Mary's context, but it's also the context of everybody in the New Testament. The whole of the New Testament is written by people who are dealing with being under occupation and figuring out what that means, how to be God's people in the midst of this circumstance. Sometimes they take the direct opposition tactic. Sometimes it's a little more subversive. Sometimes it seems in later letters to partially capitulate even. But in all cases, the people of the New Testament are under occupation and trying to figure out how to be God's people there. This is always the context, so if we talk about it a lot, that's why. It's been forgotten sometimes or squished to the side by governments that would like us to forget that, right? But we're not going to forget. And with Mary, we see a young woman under occupation giving a direct opposition example, right? She is speaking directly to power with courage and boldness. This is prophetic opposition. This is not really the picture of Mary that we sometimes see in our Christmas pageants. No meek and mild Mary today, right? Today she is powerful, she is on fire, she is on a tirade against the powers that be. And of course, yes, she was before this, if we read up a little bit like we did last Wednesday, she was bewildered and confused. She was afraid. We know this to be true. And today we see her find her courage and raise her voice. This is good news, even just that much, right, for us, because those two experiences of fear and of courage are not mutually exclusive. We can move in and out of those just like Mary does here. But as a young woman, she's living under occupation. She has no power. She is particularly the center of scandal and shame in her own community. She is turned up pregnant without being married. And her life is in danger in many ways, right? Physically, just the danger of giving birth. Culturally, she is at the bottom of the totem pole already. Religiously, she is laden with the kind of shame that our religion still lays on young women in her circumstance. And in all of that, she says, God has looked with favor on me. God's the only one, right? God has looked with favor on my lowly state, on my humiliated state. God has looked at all of that and seen her with favor. And she starts listing what God can do. And she lists it with such confidence that she does it in the past tense, right? She is so sure that God will do these things that she speaks about it as if it were already done. God has scattered the proud. God has brought down the powerful. God has lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things. God has sent the rich away empty. God has come to help and remember God's promises. God is here for the oppressed. She is singing this song under the occupation of Rome, a colonizing power of violent power. And this song in that context is revolutionary. It's not a sweet lullaby. It is seditious. It foments rebellion. And we know that this is the case because her song has continued to do that throughout history. I don't know if you know, but the Magnificat was banned in the 1970s and 80s by Guatemala, by Chile, by Argentina, banned by oppressive regimes that did not want the churches and people, the regular people, reciting it because it brought them toward rebellion, right? Even in India, during British rule, it was banned. It is said that Mahatma Gandhi, not a Christian but a leader of India, asked for Mary's song to be read aloud as the British flag was lowered, wherever it was lowered, on the final day of British rule in India. This is a revolutionary song, and the powers that be know it. Here in the U.S., we skip over it a lot of times or don't attribute it to Mary, right? I asked Google this morning because I was curious, what's the longest speech by a woman in the New Testament? And it didn't even, this is it, but it did not bring it up. It said, well, Elizabeth talks a little bit here and there, Mary Magdalene speaks there. Don't trust your Google AI, the thing that comes up at the top, people. But I wonder how much that is intentional, how much we've lost that these are Mary's words. Who is speaking and in what context that these words come out of? I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it labeled as socialist propaganda, right, by our states. But those contexts where it is pushed aside or where it was banned or avoided are exactly where it most belongs, exactly where we can see it doing what it was meant to do, because those contexts echo the context that Mary first unleashed these powerful words in. All right, so that's context number one, the context of occupation, oppression, deep inequity. And we can probably find some connections to our own world without having to work too hard. The other context that I think is just as important is the context she's in with Elizabeth, this context of love and support and welcome, the context of belonging. These words are not spoken by a warrior. They're not spoken from a place of revenge or hatred, right? These are spoken by a young mother in the context of love and care and someone who believes her. Elizabeth, her cousin, her friend, has welcomed her when she was running away from home. And Elizabeth is also pregnant miraculously. You can read all about that story a little bit before this. And she not only welcomes Mary with open arms, Mary who's been shunned, Mary who's been whispered about, she welcomes her with open arms. She believes her. She somehow understands what is happening to her and through her as a part of God's plan. And Elizabeth looks at Mary and calls her blessed. Everyone else looks at Mary as a problem, but Elizabeth looks at her as a gift. And that's when Mary starts seeing herself as one, right? She doesn't sing this song until after someone sees her as blessed. It's that context of love, of empowerment, that allows Mary to sing her song, her prophetic words. Because love is what transforms our fear into our power, right? This is a moment of clarity for Mary, who felt helpless and desperate. This moment of clarity that Elizabeth facilitates for her, she sees that God is with her and for her and working through her, just as she is. She can see that about herself because she sees that happening in Elizabeth, and she hears Elizabeth believing that about her, and their love for each other, their mutually reinforcing belief, expands their vision beyond Elizabeth's living room to all the poor and all the lowly and all the hungry and all the people seen as problems in their world. These women proclaim that God is with and for and working through all of them. And Mary finds solidarity, and Mary begins to preach the gospel, right? This is the first time that we really hear this in the Gospel of Luke. And we hear it echoed later in her son's words, and it's no wonder, right? This may be the first time she's preached this song, but I bet it became his lullaby as he grew up. This is a song that makes Jesus into who he is. Love liberates. Our reading from Maya Angelou talks about love liberating us into life, striking away the chains of fear from our souls and setting us free. And I think we see that in our text today. In the context of love, Mary's fear is transformed to power. She is free to preach, to believe, to hope with confidence. And in that freedom, she preaches freedom and flourishing for all people. Love is not just a nice, cozy feeling. It builds, it expands, it proclaims blessing, it demands justice. So, the Magnificat, this beautiful, beautiful, powerful poem and song, is in the context of occupation and in the context of love. All right. So why does it matter? And what do we do? Those are like the two questions always on my mind when I'm thinking about sermons, right? Why does it matter and what do we do? The context of occupation matters because it is not long ago in some far, far away place, right? We need to know where Jesus is now, where to look for God being born today, this Christmas. And the powers that be want us to keep looking up at them, to keep hoping for answers and salvation and peace, however false it might be, by looking up, by looking to the powers of our world. But in our sacred story, that is not where God is. In our sacred story, God is with the poor, the hungry, the humiliated, the colonized, the abused, those whose lives are at the whim of others, those at the bottom of the social and legal and political hierarchy. That is still where we look for and where we find Jesus. We find Jesus in Palestine, y'all. We find Jesus in the immigration detention centers here in Texas. We find Jesus in the lives and communities of our trans siblings. We find Jesus at God's family dinner. These are the places where salvation is gestating, where God meets us. The incarnation of Christ, the divine and fleshed, however we understand that, is the ultimate act of solidarity. And we are called as followers of Jesus into that solidarity, into those same kinds of places now. The context matters because it tells us where to look now. So what do we do? Well, there's a lot of things, right? But one thing that we can do that I think we see happening in our story today is that we can create contexts of love and support, just like Elizabeth did. We can welcome each other. We can believe each other. We can call out the prophet in each other. Think for a minute about who has done that for you. I hope that you all have people like Elizabeth in your lives. Today I'm thinking about my mentor, Sarah Shelton. She's receiving an award this morning at her church. Well, she's retired, but she was the first senior pastor that was a woman at the Baptist Church of the Covenant in Birmingham, Alabama. And she was there for 30 years, so I guess that means she started in the 90s. She is my Elizabeth. She is someone who creates a context of love and belief, and her miracles that have happened in her life and her ministry empower me to see them happening in mine. Who are your Elizabeths? Do that for other people. We can all be Elizabeths to each other. We all have opportunities to create those contexts of love and belonging. How can you do that this holiday season? I think this is a big part of our calling as a church. This is what we do on Sundays, I think, is to be like Elizabeth's living room right here, right? Welcoming each other, greeting each other with delight, seeing God's blessing on each other, even if nobody else outside of here sees it. Proclaiming the good news of God's reversal with confidence, even when it's not done yet, even when we don't all always feel confident about it. We can call out that prophet in each other. We can empower each other as regular, vulnerable, fearful people to be bold, to speak truth, to lift up the poor, to bring down the powerful, to create a new kind of world together, or at least just little pockets of it where we can. In the context of love, those little pockets will expand. They can't help it. They will grow and spread, whether we see the ways they grow and spread or not, through our work here together and through our work apart as we go through our weeks. UBC, this Advent and Christmas season, may we look for God in the places that God always shows up. May we remember where that is. May we find solidarity with those who are suffering and exploited in our world, around the globe, in our own neighborhoods, in our church family, and even in the vulnerable parts of ourselves. May we root ourselves in love and cultivate that love, that sisterly, cousinly love that transforms each other's fear into power, that calls out the prophet in each other. And may our love grow and expand and join in the liberating work of Christ's love in the world. Amen.